My guest is Joshua Gould. Maybe you've seen him before on his own podcast or others, and he's really an interesting expert in the area of managing business conversations in multiple languages. And that caught my attention because I've dealt internationally, and there are a lot of nuances in how people communicate, um, hand motions, certainly language that can get miscommunicated easily. And in business, across cultures, borders, international markets, that can be an expensive mistake. So, in a world where relationships, nuance, timing, and trust can really determine whether opportunities move forward or fail, Josh brings valuable insight. And we're going to learn all about how he helps leaders communicate more effectively on the global stage. So thank you, Joshua.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Diane. I'm going to play that intro for my kids because they think I'm an expert in nothing.
Well, we already know you know two languages, British English and American English, and they are very different, especially if you lived in New York City and New Jersey. They're all different.
Yeah, well, I am struggling with both. I used to live on Water Street in New York, and no one ever understood when I said, please take me to Water and Pine, which is the crossroad in Manhattan. And I changed it then to water, and everyone, oh, water. Why didn't you just say water? And, so I learned the hard way that you have to localize.
Well, and then add slang to the equation. We have a 22-year-old, and he's like, "Mom, I'm about to get out of here." I'm like, "About it? How do you spell about? Get out?" Or
Yeah,
is one word, two word, or three? So,
yeah. My kids say bro, and I tell them, I'm not your bro, I'm your dad.
oh, I got that one, so I cleared that one up.
Yeah.
And I think our daughter called me dude. I'm like, no, MOM, big letters, very different than any other relationship you're going to have, whether you like it or not.
The funny thing is my wife often tells me, let's just minimize the bad stuff because one day they're going to be on the sofa and they're going to be complaining about their mom, especially. So we may as well just minimize the bad stuff rather than focusing on the good stuff. I don't know if it's good advice or not.
That's good advice. That's good advice. So, really, what fascinated me is the international language side of not just doing business internationally, but that you're zoomed in and you found a real niche of helping people language that international business. So, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I grew up in the dot-com boom. So, I was there before it was bust, when everyone was really excited, just as we all are today for AI. And I had a neighbor, and she was 87 years old. And I asked her, what are you up to these days? And she told me that she's just opened up an international business. So I said, well, okay, what do you do? So she says, well, I've got all these antiques, you see, and I'm selling them on eBay. And I'd never heard of eBay before, but she had opened up this international business on eBay at 87 years old, marketing antiques that were worthless in the UK, but she had figured out in China, people buy them for a lot of money. So I told her that my father ran and owned a translation company. Uh, so I told her that my father owned a translation company, and I'll get her some of the descriptions in whatever language she wants. And she went ahead and she took me up on my offer. And she grew this business, and I don't know how well she did, but she went from a little old car to a brand new Mercedes. And she's no longer alive, but she had the time of her life in her late 80s building this business. And I realized the power of translation and the power, more importantly, of communication. And communication is verbal, but it's nonverbal, and it's very vast. And if you want to um, have a voice like you do on your podcasts, you can put it out and everyone can listen to you in English. But once you put those subtitles on in any language, now people are listening to you in hundreds of countries around the globe. And it's amazing what language can do and what communication can do and achieve. So that's how I got into it.
You know, and it's so interesting. We've all heard of the advertising faux pas of calling the Nova in the US, Nova in, South America, which means don't go, doesn't go, and that's a big problem. And when I saw when you could first do voice dictation and my social community was building, I was trying to answer their responses. And one day I said, oh my God, I got to make sure I put my glasses on when I'm doing these. I can't just do them by voicemail because muchas gracias comes out mooch ass, grassy ass. I'm like, oh, that is not good. Hopefully I didn't hit send on any of those.
Yeah, there's been many faux pas. I was once in China. We bought a company in China. We were visiting a hospital, and they said, we don't really need human review for our AI translations because we've had AI in the language industry since the 90s, and we've been building upon it, including neural machine translation, which is the current AI that you often now get called generative. So that wasn't from the 90s, but it was from 2013 onwards. Anyway, they took me to the clinic and it was an OBGYN clinic, but they had translated that another name for a cat clinic. And I won't be vulgar on your show, but it was interesting. So I'm trying to explain to these Chinese government officials that that's probably not great. And he says, it doesn't matter here. They come for the price.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that is really I mean, so much with AI is fascinating. So many people are using it for different things, but people who are not double checking, it's frightening. And number two, certainly in the medical industry, I can't even imagine that because I've actually worked in the medical industry for over 30 years and, interpreting clinical trial results and messaging them for the public. So to put that out without really understanding pretty complex words and risking translation issues, I can't imagine.
Yeah, well, we used to do a lot of this work where people would call in and give their adverse effects, but they would use slang. They would use, they wouldn't say the word scrotum. They would have another word for that. Um, so, this was the big challenge, and they would record these adverse effects down the phone in all these different languages, and we would have to translate them. What the big word does now that I run is we're primarily a healthcare and government contractor. So you really see the power of language, even within the US. If you've never left the US, we're able to get this mass workforce and capture it and really supersize our economy. And we have incredibly low unemployment right now. So we need everyone we can get in the workforce. We need everyone working and paying tax and contributing. And this is really where the big word comes in, because when they're sick and they need advice in their own language, it pays to give them that advice because it gets them back in the workforce, paying taxes quicker and creating businesses. And I'm not political because I deal with politicians all day and they're all the same. I hate to break it to your audience, but they're pretty much all the same in the end. They may start out radically different, but they end up the same. And, one of the things that I've explained to them is the value in every single person, whether they speak limited, no, or full English. They all have value. And I've lived in New York. I know you're in New York, but we wouldn't be able to open a restaurant without some of these people.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And now I want you to explain to us all what is it you're doing for healthcare or government contracts? Where does big world come into the picture?
Yeah, so the big word essentially is in the picture right from the beginning. You want to set up your appointment with your doctor. You can get that appointment card in your own language. You go into the hospital and you register all your documentation. You can do it in your own language, and then we can apply AI to then pre-upload everything and all your charts back into the system. It can have a human check, so you get human quality at very low cost. So it has human in the loop. And then you go and see your doctor. And I don't know if you've ever had one, but I recently had a colonoscopy. And I went up to the doctor for my pre discussion, and they explain what's happening. So we provide video interpretation. This is live humans on demand. It's like a miracle. On demand in any language you want in under 60 seconds. We do that 90% of the time. And then,
Remark.
yeah, and then for harder discussions, thank God with me, they didn't find anything, but let's say they find something that's cancerous, maybe they want a human. So just like Uber on our app, you can press a button and an interpreter will show up. Not quite as quick as Uber, but they'll show up within, typically we need a 24-hour notice. And these appointments are nearly always made with more than 24 hours notices. So over the phone, face to face, video, and written all comes through the same application. And that's what we do. And we have over 10,000 human interpreters working with us in our workforce. We work in over 80 different countries. And we do the bit of work that, that's difficult, that's thankless. Our interpreters have a difficult time. Our customers all want the lowest price. And at the same time, they want really high quality language services because the risk of getting it wrong is really dangerous.
Yes.
This isn't just money risk, this is life and death risk. And we provide not just healthcare, but we're in military theaters of operation. We're on the borders. We're in the criminal court system, in the civil court system, in the family court system. We're in the prisons. We're in the police stations, whether you be in Amsterdam and you've got yourself in trouble, or whether you're in the UK, or whether you're here in America. So I always like to joke, we're the really big company that you've never heard of.
You know, I, exactly. So let's talk about that. How does somebody say we need you versus, let's say, AI or Google Translate? We
It's a
need
good
to
question.
match.
For the average Joe, you probably just need AI. We are the commercial deliverers, so we're delivering at scale. Our contracts are at least in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but quite often in the many millions of dollars. And if you've just got a website that you want to translate one page of, well, probably AI it. Probably tell your audience that you've AI'd it because it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be good. I can tell you it's going to be good. If it's generic enough, if it's general marketing, something like that, when you need us is when you need something that's either highly specialized, like you may speak perfect Spanish, but do you know the word for gauze in Spanish? Now, gauze is a common medical term. Do you know the word for carpet tile in Spanish? Maybe you know the word for floor covering, but this is the kind of demand that we get, or whether the risk of getting it wrong is too big. So if you're Procter and Gamble and you're spending $50 million a year on advertising, or $100 million a year, spending a few $100,000 checking your message and localizing it is probably a decent investment. Again, with the governments, we're in the court systems. When you are, let's say it's a criminal case and someone's facing 10 plus years in jail, 97% accurate witness statements aren't enough. They've got to be 100% as good as human. Humans aren't accurate. So 97% is already not 100% accurate. And, this is where people call upon the big word, and, we're a big operation and they come to us and we integrate into the back end of their systems. So in the healthcare, We can integrate into all the healthcare applications, whether it's like Epic, which is a huge, for your audience, I'm sure you know it, being in healthcare, but Epic is probably the largest healthcare software across America. There's all sorts of chart softwares. We'll integrate into the back end to make everything accessible in the correct language
It
of,
sounds to me like you are the ultimate risk mitigator system or option for anybody considering AI. So it's kind of like, yeah, you can have your AI, your AI platforms, which annoy the crap out of me. When you're dealing with, it went from the chatbot to this now, oh, the human AI person, but it gets to that point where that risk level gets higher and higher, as you said, with interpreting a medical chart, interpreting what someone says to a doctor or a doctor says to a patient or a pharmacy when they're giving direct, there's so many online pharmacies right now and that are being owned and purchased by hospital systems. Uh, I- y- wow, law firms. I see so many obvious
yeah, law
applications
firms
for
are big
this.
users. Yeah, law firms will do depositions and they're not always in English, and those do need to be human. I have to say, we as the big word don't care whether you want AI or human. That's not where we add our value. We
Mhm.
add our value into the integrations, the back end systems, and we then apply a huge amount of value add within the workflow. So if you want a translation just of words, you probably don't really need us. But if you've got a huge website that's on a content management system and you're getting 20, 30 updates to that website every single day, it becomes too confusing. How do you know where that Russian is supposed to live on your content management system and the Chinese you've just got? So that's what we're doing. We're integrating into the back end of your content management system, organizing all your content, knowing where it goes, being able to value it, being able to establish what needs human translation, what needs human in the loop with AI, what needs AI. And then when people call in, you've got to speak to these people in that language. So again, we provide the real human interpretation. And one thing that probably is going to shock your users, Diane, is that AI for professional language services is not cheap. And it's probably cheaper for professional language services than it is for almost anything else. So AI is extremely expensive. We're not talking about, going on to Claude and paying $20 a month or ChatGPT and using the free version. If you're doing it at scale, you're using a lot of tokens. And Uber just announced that it ran through 12 months of tokens in 13 weeks. And Nvidia have just announced that they're spending more money on tokens than they are on developers by a long shot. So these tokens are very, very expensive. And this is the shocking part, is that they are going up by about 50% a year. So the inflation is 50% a year. Right now, if you want an AI interpreter from the big word, you're paying 75% of the value of a human. But by next year, you may be paying 1.5 times what a human costs.
Oh. So for someone who does not know, can you define what a token is?
That's a very good question because it's a highly complex answer. But just to try and simplify it, every time you put a request into ChatGPT or Claude, it has to run processes, and it will it will tokenize your words. And then depending on how many processes it needs to run against those words, it uses then a number of tokens. So if I just want to translate something in ChatGPT, it may use 1,000 tokens for a sentence. But if I want to interpret it into spoken, I now have to use different processes. So I have to now run tokens to translate it. I have to do voice recognition. I have to then put it back into a voiceover. I have to then give it back to you. And the reason that AI companies use these tokens is what they are is units of energy. Ultimately, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to charge you for units of energy because what is their real raw materials? Their raw materials is electricity, it's server space, it's chips, these NVIDIA chips that everyone's very excited about, which are like silicon chips. And it's the rental of all of that electricity usage and server space that you're paying for. Now, the bit that a lot of investors, even very smart Wall Street investors, are missing is all these companies are losing money and they actually scale negatively. Claude is the most expensive by far, but it's losing billions of dollars. And ChatGPT is owned by OpenAI, and they're estimated to lose between 10 and $20 billion next year. So they've got to increase their prices significantly to make them profitable. And they don't scale. You know, this isn't like creating a television where the more you make, the cheaper it is. Software actually does the other way around. You pay to build it once. And it doesn't really cost any more whether you sell it 1,000 times or only one time, but it doesn't really change the price either.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, I'm just curious, because you mentioned 2000s.com. I was there. I remember that very vividly. I had an investor relations firm that wasn't that old at that time. And you're seeing everybody putting in their bids on AI and where they think it's going. I was recently at the Time 100 AI conference where, everyone was trying to make their prediction as to what it's going to look like 5 years from now. Where do you see this landscape shifting, particularly with your business?
Yeah, this is like the internet, right? And everyone said it's a fad, it's a bubble. And, you can argue we've lived through it. The dot-com boom and bust was absolutely a bubble, but that didn't make the internet bad. It just meant investors overvalued it. And I think this is the same right now. I think AI is critical to every single business. You need to be implementing AI, but not for the sake of AI. You need to be finding where it can drive down your unit rate so you can pass that on to the consumer. Because if you're not doing that, your competitors are, and they'll get ahead of you and they'll have an advantage. You need to figure out how it can speed up, especially in service businesses like mine. You need to be able to use it to speed up the turnaround time and the outcome. And then you need to figure out how to essentially use AI to supercharge your human workforce.
Mhm.
Because humans, I hate to tell all the people that just invested all that money in the IPO of SpaceX and paying 300 times profit for Tesla. And I'm a fan of Tesla. I drive one. But you aren't going to get rid of humans. There's not going to be this need for generic. I can give you a lot of evidence. It's not an opinion, but when they bought out the combine harvester, I wasn't around. I know I look old, but I've had a hard life. But the combine harvester, there was going to be no farmers, zero farming. And of course, we have more farmers today than we did pre-combine harvester when a farmer needed to ride a horse. Why? Because we brought the price of food down so low that everyone started having babies in the 40s and 50s and 60s and
Mhm.
the baby booming times because things were affordable and food prices came down. So anytime technology makes things accessible, truly accessible, there is a huge boom in demand. And that's what I think you're going to see. So it already is making a huge, huge shift in demand for my industry. Now you've got,
Yeah, go ahead. And where do you see that going? What's your prediction 2 years to 5 years from now?
so let me give you some facts. all of the content in the world doubles every single year at the moment. So every bit of content that was created from biblical times onwards doubles in a 12-month period. And a lot of that has to get translated. Now, the estimate is roughly 99% of it will be done by AI and 1% by human, but that's massive growth in human translation and interpretation. So we do both. We provide AI and human and hybrid as well. And what that's doing is it's driving about a 6% increase in demand in my industry. However, there's this mid market, and the mid market are your kind of slightly bigger than your mom and pop shops. These are people maybe with businesses around $10 million. They've got no outside investors. They take out $1 million-ish a year in cash, and they live in really nice houses, and they drive a nice car, and maybe they've got a boat or a little Cessna that they fly around, and they've got a holiday at home. Those people are underinvesting in my industry, and I think in many industries, like crazy in their businesses. And those are the ones that are risk of AI destroying. And then you get companies like TheBigWord who eventually will come to you and say, I offered you 10x EBITDA 3 years ago. Well, now you shrunk 40%. You've got no technology. How about merging with our business? But we can only pay you 3x because there's so many of you and I can only implement so many of you at once. So I see that happening. There's going to be large scale consolidation across many industries. This will happen in PR firms. This will happen in marketing agencies. So
Yeah.
the need is going away. It's the need is the same, but the delivery mechanism is changing. And if you don't change with it, if you don't invest in it, then other people are your competition are, and eventually you'll be forced to merge or close down.
I think you're spot on. I really do. I started to see it, in PR years ago. I had an investor relations firm for 20 years, which I sold. And if I think you've got to have the consolidation because the costs to run it and compete when somebody else has that bigger budget for the things like you're talking about that you do, you just can't. So you've got to keep consolidating and figuring out the way. I also agree, it's not the people that'll go. The people will shift. They'll shift in their roles and what they have to do and what's required. It'll just be different.
It will. It will. I mean, there's always going to be someone who refuses to change, but for the most part, is going to shift. I spent about $15 million on AI and automation in the last few years.
Mhm.
My competition probably spent the same, at least the bigger ones. And once you put this together, you would have only spent it once and it would have been better value for the end user. So there will be these mergers, but I have a lot of competition as well that spent nothing. And they're still saying my customers want white glove service, and they're not wrong. But when their customers start losing customers themselves because they're too expensive and they've got to start laying off staff, well, all of a sudden they come to me and say, all right, I know I'm going to get less white glove service, but I really need a lower unit rate. And then they're going to be shocked that they get the same service or better from me, even though it doesn't have a person with a white glove delivering it to them. It's through an application, it's through a piece of software. And I think that that is the mindset shift that is still yet to happen in the majority of middle market, where they're drinking their own Kool-Aid and they're saying, this is a fad, it's a bubble. It's not. It might be an investor bubble, but that doesn't make it a technology bubble.
That is the caption for this episode. I
Okay.
mean, seriously, I really do think that it might be an investor bubble, but it's not a technology bubble. Just like going back to 2000, which, 2003, everyone was raising 10, 20 million more, on a napkin, and everyone was going to build their platforms, and the biggest advertisers in the world were going to keep them going. The dot-com bubble burst. Yet technology got stronger and stronger, and all these things we all looked at, who would have thought Amazon would become all the things Amazon had become, which was pushing for money in 1997. I mean, I remember that vividly, when they were running around trying to raise money. It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, I remember Google. When Google publicly listed, I just moved or was moving at the time to New York. And everyone was saying it's so overvalued, there's no fundamentals. And I read somewhere recently how I can't remember how rich you would be, but if you put $10,000 in on the day of their IPO, even though you would have actually, I think, lost money in the first day or so, you'd be a multimillionaire today. And I think people have learned, retail investors have learned from this, and that's why you're seeing them flock to SpaceX IPO coming up and Anthropic IPO. And the amount of people that tell me, I know I'm going to lose money in the first few years, but I don't want to be the idiot that didn't put $10,000 in day one that could be a multimillionaire in the future.
Hmm.
And history doesn't always repeat, but it usually rhymes. And I think that this is where there's no guarantees we're in a bubble right now, because at the end of the day, stocks is still supply and demand, and there's a lot of demand for US stocks.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, these interviews always go too fast. They really do. But I can already picture part two coming up at some point in our future because there's more we could have kept discussing. And I could have kept this going because I find what you're talking about fascinating. And maybe we should talk again after some of those IPOs and we
Yeah,
can,
let's do it. Let's do a live one in New York because I forgot my mic, so I apologize. I'm using my laptop mic in my studio today. So I've got expensive studio and lighting and no mic. But let's do a live one next time in New York. I have a place in New York,
yeah.
and
Well,
let's do it there.
well, okay. Josh, do not go anywhere. I'm Diane Griesel. This is the Silver Expedience Perceptual Dynamics podcast. My guest today has been Joshua Gould. He's the president and
CEO.
CEO of BigWord. And there are going to be all kinds of links for you to follow and learn more about what he's doing. Because frankly, I really found this fascinating. And if you know anybody who's got a healthcare business, I'm just going to say any kind of business, you want to listen to what he had to say because I have a feeling a lot of what he shared is pretty astute, and you're either going to be on the train or sorry you missed it. So thank you, Joshua.
Thank you, Diane.
Okay, everybody, hit subscribe, follow Joshua. Talk to you soon.